when you're the CEO, and I like to champion the technology that we implement because I feel like it's the way to get buy-in. But you also feel a little bit like you better be right, that this is a better way to do things, because the learning curve is definitely going to detract in the short term, at least, from people's productivity. And so you're asking everyone in the company to learn Slack, and you're telling them you may no longer send an internal email. Internal only emails are banned. If you're emailing someone and there's no one from outside the company on the email, you are doing it wrong, and you have to drive that in for a couple weeks. Well, you better be right that, in fact, Slack is better than email. I firmly believe it is. But there was a tool I tried to implement for this 8, 10 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that, and it was not better. And I implemented it, and I compelled everyone to use it, and it worked great in the demo, and it was painfully slow in reality. And we had to give up on it, and we had already signed a contract. So there was, you remember those things, and if you don't, your team will remind you of them. And so there's a little bit of risk every time you try to improve your tech stack.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denewell
and Amy Weaver. Today on the RevOps Champions podcast, you're a unique guest. As we discussed in our previous conversation, the makeup of your teams doesn't quite look like what maybe you would typically think of in an organization that sort of follows the RevOps frameworks. So can you tell us a little bit about how the teams at Ignite are structured today, and maybe how you came up with that, how they're aligned on their various objectives, and we'll go from there.
I guess I'd say that the primary differentiator is we don't have any salespeople. People ask me all the time, who does your sales? And we don't have salespeople in the traditional sense. We do have people who figure out what our proposal is going to be, figure out what our pricing is going to be, but we don't have anyone reaching out proactively to try to drum up business. And that sounds a little crazy, except we've grown 4 out of the last 5 years. We're up significantly this year over last year. And I think it really comes down a little bit to the type of PR, if you will, and the price point of the product and who buys the product. So Ignite is a social media marketing agency. Our clients typically spend in fees a month between $10,000 and $50,000 a month. And so it is not something, in my experience, that you can sort of cold call your way into. People who are switching agencies do it through a fairly thoughtful process, because they're looking for relationships that will ideally last a couple of years and be fairly expensive, and ideally be contributive to, which is a word I may have just made up, to their success of their own sales. And so we have done things in the past, which we can talk about, where we did a ton of outbound email. We followed up with phone calls. We did some even physical mail, and found it very expensive and found it very unproductive. And it's not the way we drive most of our revenue. So that's probably the biggest difference between us and an average organization, where that would be probably inconceivable.
So what is the role on your team that's handling, like, building those proposals and stuff like that?
So we call it a business development team. And that team is is basically proposal creation, and all of our proposals are customized. So we also do influencer marketing. Influencer marketing is a bit more templated because it's kind of one thing, and so those tactics tend to repeat. But the rest of it, whether we're doing content creation or community management or paid advertising or strategy, they're all sort of built to maximize each client's budget and each client's results. And so they're custom designed, in which we pull in relevant experience and custom pricing packages and things like that. So that's what we do to respond to opportunities. In terms of driving opportunities, most of them come from inbound. So we do spend an awful lot of time on blog writing, sometimes webinars. We do some video creation that we turn into blog posts and post on YouTube. So not really a true podcast format, but trying to rank on not only for our own blog, but for those YouTube videos on very specific topics that might be of interest. And that is a significant source. In fact, organic inbound traffic, organic search traffic is our number one source of lead generation, and then referrals is the number two source. And so those referrals may come from past clients who have gone on to other places, or current clients referring a colleague at a different organization, or they may come from lists of social media agencies. And we do spend a fair amount of marketing time trying to get on those lists. So we're not just sitting here waiting patiently for the proverbial doorbell to ring, but we're also not knocking on doors in a traditional way.
Okay. And when it's time for business development to then hand off, someone has signed an agreement with you, they're going to become a client, what does that handoff look like? And I'm assuming that's like an account management team that it
That's
goes
exactly
to.
right. And our account management team, I should say, is a major source of revenue as well, because a huge percentage of our revenue is going to come from current clients adding things to their scopes as they go. And of course, renewals every year are you want a high renewal rate, so you're not starting from scratch every year. So our account management team is a significant part of our rev ops, if you will, and they're important. So the handoff is really a handoff telling people as much as we know about the players involved on the client team, as much as we can tell about their personalities, what does success look like for them, what are their challenges, but then also what is the scope. Why was it developed that way? And specifically, what is included, what is not included. We try to be really clear with the client on that, but then we have to be really clear in the handoff to the account management team as to why. And often those scopes are iterations of the first discussion where, we might say, well, to do everything you said you wanted to do is going to cost X, and the client says, well, I only have 75% of X. And so we say, all right, given that, here's where we would cut to maximize your efficiency. So handing off those conversations and then ensuring that the team that does the business development is in on the first couple of meetings with that. We even have some people who are sort of hybrid business development and account management, so they can see it from both sides. And I think that's super important, because the sales team can be incentivized to just sell and not really worry about the problems they are causing with for the team that has to implement. So that is something that we make sure the implementers are involved in the scope creation, because they can look for things and see things right up front that are going to be a problem if they're not addressed.
So a lot of alignment. I'm hearing alignment.
Yeah, it's funny, when we first talked, I was picturing RevOps as something very different than I think what I've learned it actually is, and what I now better understand is it's really about alignment, and it's really about everyone pulling in the right direction. And our marketing, I've been clear to our marketing team that our marketing exists to drive sales. It doesn't exist to get buzz. If it did, we would be doing funny videos. In fact, our most popular YouTube video has, 110,000 views, and it's our team doing the Harlem Shake back when that was a thing for 10 minutes. And great, we got 110,000 views. That is completely and utterly worthless to us as a company. We don't even look like professionals. Like, we look like, we're just having fun, so that kind of thing, if you set your metrics for YouTube views, you're going to lead yourself in a path that isn't, the metric is, are we driving revenue?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, Jim, as you've been explaining your structure, it absolutely follows the sort of the typical RevOps structure that everyone listening is familiar with, which is, so your revenue team, or your customer facing team, is typically split into marketing, sales, and customer service. Even though the names might be a little different from one organization to another, you clearly have a very strong marketing function. Your sales function is what you call business development, which is not unusual in professional services organizations, right? And then you have your account managers are essentially your customer. They're also your customer service. So that's it's really a very typical go-to-market model, and fits perfectly within RevOps. But of course, what differs from one company to the next, and also depending on industry and what have you, is kind of where to Amy's question earlier, it's where is the handoff, and what is marketing responsible for, and what is business development responsible for, and what is account management / customer service, what are they responsible for, and do they then all have their metrics that tie up to the business, the business goals?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one point, I think people generally on podcasts like to talk about what they do well as an organization. I will tell you what we do very poorly as an organization. We don't have that single source of truth for data. We do know, our financial system is counting the money. It's aligned with the bank account. That is fact. That is truth. What I mean is, when a new lead comes in, for an opportunity, I should say. When an opportunity comes in, we put it in HubSpot. It's often hard to know what the dollar value is initially, but we put that in HubSpot. We then develop our scope of work in Excel. That scope of work is built upon, we don't charge hourly, but we calculate basically fees on anticipated levels of effort. So we're basically calculating the hours it's going to take. That is then left in Excel. It doesn't go into our project management system, which we use a system called Reich. It doesn't go in there with a neat allocation of, you've been allocated 4 hours a week, you've been allocated 12 hours a week, and none of that talks to that financial system. And so we've got these points where we're re-entering things, and I have tried to, over the last few years, fix that. I think one of the major issues is we have a really archaic financial system. And when we looked into changing it would have been about $50,000, which is a meaningful amount of money for a 45-person company. But then the implementation, they were expecting another $100,000 to $150,000 for the implementer. And I thought, okay, well, we have other problems. This one's probably not a $200,000 problem that I need to fix today. And so, totally. I can see how we could be better. And I can see how we're not great at that and how it's costing us time. But fixing it is no small lift when you've gone down this path for years and years.
Yeah, I don't know how long ago it was that you looked into that, Jim, but it would be interesting to know how that would look today with how these platforms have all evolved. And, you'd think in many cases, implementing and integrating a system like that is probably a lot less expensive, or should I say a smaller investment today than it was, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. But
it was actually 2 or 3 years ago that we looked into it. So maybe it's time to revisit.
Revisit that. Yeah. Well, it's like we were talking to somebody about implementing Salesforce, and how if you don't have it in your budget to have the Salesforce admin, whether it's an employee or like a contractor, that's a huge piece.
Salesforce can do anything. And if you don't know what you want it to do when you get in there, you can get all sorts of mired, and you can hit buttons saying, well, that sounds cool, let's try this. And all of a sudden you're in a big mess.
Yes.
So, okay. You started off there saying that you don't yet have that single source of truth, but you realize that it's something that at some point sounds like it would make a lot of sense, and obviously help you and your team make better, faster decisions. So I'm sure it'll bubble up to the top again as a priority at some point, because that's something we hear about on almost every episode and every person we speak to. always the conversation always goes to, what is our most critical business data.
Yeah, and it was on the list again this year. It just didn't bubble up into the top 3. So
Right,
there's
exactly,
there's only
exactly.
so much you can so many big chunks of things you can change in a year.
And then I guess the other thing that typically follows that data / KPI conversation around like the single source of truth is your tech stack or your system of tools, which again is another area which can either be, you have too little or too much in that area. And what Amy and I hear a lot is the when you have technology bloat, as we call it, where you suddenly wake up one day and you have 3 systems that you don't actually use anymore. It just kind of creeps up on you. How do you think about your tech stack, and do you feel that that's is helping your marketing, your biz dev, and your account management team do their jobs well?
I think we have many very good tools, and I wish we had 1 or 2 very good tools. For example, Zoom is really good for meetings. Slack is really good. Rike is solid. You can do a lot of things with Rike. HubSpot is very good. But there I'm already into 4. Box for storing files is very good. But what's interesting is all of those tools start adding each other's features. So you can comment on a Box file, or you can comment on the task associated with that file in Rike, or you can talk about it in Slack. And now Zoom's adding chat as well. And so you can chat about the meeting and live in that chat. And so, right now, what has to happen in an environment like that is you have to go right to sort of cultures and norms. We have to teach new people. We don't discuss anything in Box. We generally discuss everything in Slack. You can talk about a specific task over in Rike, but everything else is in Slack. Like, you have to teach people that. Yes, it has that feature. You need to ignore that feature because nobody can check 4 different places. And it's something I would like to get down. But one of the things that is an interesting challenge with the other members of my management team is they have a healthy skepticism that there is a single tool or 2 tools that will do all these things extremely well. And based on our experience, Microsoft Teams should replace Zoom and Slack. But in my experience, it does not. And there should be a tool that pulls in all these hours and tracks to things and talks to HubSpot. And when Rike added the ability to track level of effort, we thought that was a game changer. We could tell how busy each person was, but it doesn't pull in how many meetings you have in a given week. So one person may have 10 available hours and one person may have 35 available hours, and it doesn't align neatly with Outlook. And then even if it does pull in meetings, well, some people block times on their calendar to work on things that look like meetings. And so it just constantly, there's human nature and there's the engineers building the tools, and they sometimes just collide with one another.
Yeah. And of course, I think one of the challenges there is that the tools are, to your earlier point, are able to do so much more than what we really need them to do. But when any user sees that functionality and it goes, oh, I didn't know this had this functionality or feature, I'm going to start using that. But then they're the only one using it, whereas they should actually be using that functionality in one of the other tools.
Yes.
But yeah, it's hard. And I think we've learned 2 really interesting things in the last week, just having conversations like this. One is, we all know that every business has a set of core processes, right, which starts with marketing and goes all the way through to finance and then everything in between. But never have we or anyone that we've spoken to or any of our clients suggested a technology process. And in fact, that was suggested to us this morning, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes total sense, because one of the guests we had in the podcast 2 weeks ago, talked about the fact that if you build something like this, you should actually do it manually first. So back to your Excel spreadsheet sort of example, which a lot of businesses still use, map out the whole process from marketing through to business development, through to account management, all the way through to finance, and who's finally counting what's left at the end of the day. Map that all out manually, and then go back to your tools and say, okay, so what tool can get us from here to here, from here to here, from here,
Where are the gaps?
and then just strip out the rest, which I thought was really insightful, and it's something that we're going to be doing ourselves.
It's a very interesting idea. I was struck as you were talking that when you're the CEO, and I like to champion the technology that we implement because I feel like it's the way to get buy-in. But you also feel a little bit like you better be right, that this is a better way to do things, because the learning curve is definitely going to detract, in the short term at least, from people's productivity. And so you're asking everyone in the company to learn Slack, and you're telling them you may no longer send an internal email. Internal only emails are banned. If you're emailing someone and there's no one from outside the company on the email, you are doing it wrong. And you have to drive that in for a couple weeks. Well, you better be right that, in fact, Slack is better than email. I firmly believe it is. But there was a tool I tried to implement for this 8-10 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that, and it was not better. And I implemented it, and I compelled everyone to use it, and it worked great in the demo, and it was painfully slow in reality. And we had to give up on it, and we had already signed a contract. So there was, you remember those things, and if you don't, your team will remind you of them. And so there's a little bit of risk every time you try to improve your tech stack.
That's
yeah,
so
actually,
true.
I learned a really interesting trick yesterday, which might be valuable to you based on what you just said. And that was, so a lot of us struggle, because of the first 18 years of our lives being so impactful on all of us in one way or another. We learn certain things that maybe don't help us as adults. And one of those things is saying no. And the trick is, when instead of saying no to something, because 90% of the time, the reason you're saying no is because it's the timing is just not right. Right. So instead of saying no, you say not right now. And I was just thinking as you were talking, so the way to flip that around to the positive is when folks are asking you, is this the best tool for us to be using? You say, yes, right now it is. But you're not sort of committing yourself to that this is going to be because it's out of your control, right? You have no idea what the engineers are going to be doing with this tool. And those engineers are not living in a vacuum, because there are other tools that are trying to be better than that tool. So it's like, yes, for right now, this is the best tool. But we might have to change it in a year from now, So, which of course is a hard message to deliver, but it's a little more, I guess, maybe easier to swallow and easier to deliver.
If you work in social media marketing and you're uncomfortable with change, you should probably leave, because this industry's changed a lot in the 17 years we've been doing it, and it continues to change. We might lose TikTok in a couple months. We'll see.
Right,
gosh,
exactly.
yeah.
I mean, we feel the same way in technology, and which is why we have, one of our core values is lead the change, because I mean, that's literally what, our clients are leaning on us for, is, change is happening whether we like it or not, and somebody has to lead that. So being comfortable with change is an important part of what we do too.
So maybe that's a good segue for us to talk about when you formed Carousel and sort of what brought that about. and the things that you learned along the way?
So Ignite is a traditional agency model, just focused on social media instead of PR or advertising. With Carousel, so that we launched Ignite in 2007. We launched Carousel in 2015. And what we were trying to solve a couple problems by creating Carousel. One was social media is inherently unpredictable. And so clients would like to ask, if I invest this, what will I get? And it's very difficult to give them an answer other than we will provide these services. And one of the things we found we were able to do with influencers is be predictive in terms of how many influencers creating how much content and how many people are going to see it or how many people are going to click on it. We had enough data to put that out in advance and to package it up where it was not selling time, which is essentially what Ignite is, but selling a package almost like a media buy where for $50,000 we'll have 5 influencers creating 25 pieces of content. It'll be seen by 6 million people, something like that. So it was sold in a different way. You might choose to do it for a product launch like you would do a media buy instead of an ongoing agency relationship. And so because of that, we set things up differently. And that is when we launched the big outbound sales program with emails and a little bit of printed mail and traveling to conferences and speaking at shows and taking big groups out to dinner. And we spent literally a couple $1 million on all that with staff and everything else. And it did okay, but most of the revenue wasn't being driven by the marketing. Most of the revenue was driven outside of that. And when we shut that down, our profitability, that's when we became profitable. We weren't profitable in the first 2 years. We shut down all the outbound sales efforts and achieved profitability within a couple months, and have sold at and been selling at a consistent level ever since. And so, I think we learned a lot about that. But also when you have experiences that are less successful or failures, depending on how you want to put that a shine on that, it does sometimes make you really cautious about what to do next, and that's a positive and a negative. It can make you too hesitant to do the right thing, or it can save you from just flushing more money down. And it's of course impossible to know before you start which one it's doing.
Does the structure look similar to Ignite, where you have business development and account management and then these hybrid roles in between?
It's similar in that, except the account management team, a little more like a PR firm. In a PR firm, the account management person is often the person doing the public relations. So our account management team on the Carousel side is actually also talking to the influencers and managing the program. And so that's really helpful in that there is not a lot of layers of phone, post office, whatever it's called, to tell people what's happening. So they can talk to the influencer, turn around and talk directly to the client. And then there's other people on the team who will talk to the client about, an ongoing program and their larger goals. But as that individual influencer flight is happening, the team running the program is talking directly to the client. That's not true with our creative team, or they generally don't talk directly to the client. The account manager is more typically the interface.
So it's almost like role, titles and roles are kind of confusing anyhow, but so it sounds like they're almost like a client strategist kind of role.
Yeah, we call them production managers because they are managing the production, and both of those words. It is a production. We need to deliver X and Y time frame, and they're managing not only the influencers, which if you've ever done that can be very difficult. They're managing the client, which is also can be very difficult. So it's definitely a learned skill on both sides of that coin.
Interesting.
And was there a business decision behind the choice to like spin off an entirely different company versus have that as a different, product offering within Ignite?
Yeah, the idea was that it's selling to a different buyer. We assumed that agencies would want to buy these packages, and in fact, that's proven to be true. About a third of carousel sales are to other agencies, and we didn't know if they'd be comfortable selling to Ignite. Then it's a buyer. It's often a budget coming out of a media budget versus a services budget, which is what the Ignite side is. And it's, the packaging of the pricing is very different. Having said that, at the end of 2020, after 5 years of operation, we simplified it and made it a subsidiary of Ignite. And so, and we don't hide that it says Carousel and Ignite Social Media Company. Agencies haven't stopped using us. We play nice in the sandbox. We don't try and steal any of their other work. It has simplified things, but we do have a carousel website that some people find us on, an Ignite website that other people find us on. So it's almost two marketing channels, but once they get in the door, it really becomes one company.
Right. So it's not because one of the things I was thinking when Amy asked that question was often when one business starts a second brand, the reason they do it is because the business model is so different.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess now that you've kind of explained both, the business model is actually very similar, it's just that you have a different audience for each one, right?
It is. And the accounting is a little different because of the way we're selling things, but that stuff, the accountants can figure out. But generally speaking, there's an agency service fee, there's a media expense, there's an influencer expense, and they're very similar breakdowns on the rest of the agency side. So yeah.
So having these two companies, if you will, you must have had a lot of experience with growing your headcount to accommodate bringing on new business and that sort of thing. But it seems like it's probably something that's always in flux, depending on like the amount of work that you have coming in. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you manage, planning, forecasting for hiring, and maybe some challenges that you've experienced when you've had to grow super quickly or the opposite problem?
We've had both. I mean, the agency business is it's a bit brutal in that, the income and staffing are basically aligned. Because you're selling time at the end of the day. And so, our first 4 years, we grew 100% plus every year. We won the Chrysler Group social media marketing right toward the fourth year or so. And that was all the marketing for Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Fiat. And so we went we were a 35-person company when we won that. We added 50 employees for that. And we did that in 8 weeks.
Wow.
We rented a house in Detroit because half of us are in Detroit, half of us are in Raleigh, and we basically lived up there. We did speed dating. We did all sorts of things to grow. And, importantly, we let the resumes screen for skills and experience, and we had the interviews screen for culture. And I know that's a word you have to be careful of because we don't want everyone to be like each other. In fact, we want to be intentionally diverse, but we also, that gets to culture a little bit in that ideally people who speak up. I think it's important that if you need a diversity of opinions, you need a diversity of experiences, you need a diversity of ideas being shared in the room to make sure the marketing that comes out of the room is going to resonate the way you think it's going to resonate. And so being really conscientious about that helped us grow in a way that we really, I feel successfully preserved Ignite's culture, which I thought was the biggest risk of going from 35 to 85 people. 3 years later, we lost that business. They don't mate for life in the auto industry, and we let go 50 people. And that was, one of the most difficult it was probably the most difficult time I've ever had. What we tried to do is be really sensitive to what was happening. So the client gave us 90 days notice. So we very quickly made the decision on who was staying and who was not. And we let them know very quickly, but they were all invited to stay until the end of the 90 days. Now, we then also told people in other agencies they were free to contact these people and interview them. We told the people they were free to use work time to go on interviews. Like, we literally wanted them to find a job. And then we wrote them each a letter that said, we guarantee this person, to the point where if you hire them and you terminate them within 12 months for character issues or performance issues, we, Ignite, will pay your company $5,000. Because the only reason we're giving them up is we lost a client. And the result of that was, I think about 85% of employees had jobs before the 90 days were up. And so they were able to leave, and I think 100% had jobs within 2 or 3 weeks of the time that the contract was over. And we never were asked to pay anybody's character reference. We would have paid it, but we were never asked. And I think one of the most important things is, over the 7 or 8 years since then, we've hired back 10 or 11 of those people. And I don't know of a greater compliment than somebody saying, I know what it's like to work there, pros and cons, and I want to come back. I think that's just the best thing somebody can say. So that's been really gratifying.
That is cool. So then you're at like 45
right now, I believe. Yeah. And by the way, that's the other thing I learned, is that nothing is free in this world. I am much happier with a company with 40 some employees than I was with a company we were over 100 for a while. And I think it's fairly well known that when you break 10 people, communication changes. When you break 40 people, communication changes. And when you break 100 people, communication changes. If you're not very intentional about building communication structures that align with those sizes of teams, you're in for a world of hurt. And as much as I do feel we preserve the culture, there are growing pains when you go above 100 employees, and I didn't particularly enjoy it. And so being careful what you wish for is the other thing that I took. I don't want that back, where a single client has 50 employees working on their business. I don't want that back.
Oh, right.
Really interesting perspective.
So, Jim, as much as we try to avoid it on the RevOps Champions podcast, AI somehow makes its way into the conversation, whether we raise it or someone else does. So you were talking earlier about something that we're very familiar with, in the professional services space, where your revenue and your headcount kind of run in parallel, right? Because ultimately, that the people are essentially the value of the business. But with AI, and again, every single time technology advances, marketing is the first thing that is impacted in a good way. Even as complex and as challenging as it might be to go through the change, marketing is always where AI and technology have the first advantage. So are you thinking about sort of AI tools and things beyond that'll scale Ignite beyond just scaling with adding headcount? Or are you already investing in that, or do you already have some things in the cooker?
Yeah, when I talked about the 3 highest priorities in a given year, last year one of those 3 was AI, and this year one of those 3 is still AI. It's the only one that carried over both years. We spent a tremendous amount of time. We published an ebook on social media marketing, in particular with AI. It's about, I think it was 13,000 words or something. It's really granular. We tested 20 different tools. What were the pros and cons of each? We needed to know for ourselves, and then we figured we might as well write it down and tell other people while we're at it. But what we have found is that, as remarkable as it is, and will continue, I think, to evolve. Its biggest opportunity at the moment is, I think, in speeding the lower value tasks along. And so we find it's very helpful in a brainstorm to, for example, ask it to write 20 tweets about a brand, and just see the direction it takes. And it may come up with 2 or 3 that are paths that we hadn't thought about. We've never found that we can use one of those tweets, or that it will create an Instagram post or a TikTok that we can share. But sometimes it'll generate a spark that would have taken maybe 10 people brainstorming in a room for an hour to come up with that many different sparks, if you will. And so that's been helpful. I also think, early on, we do a lot of blogging, and we had AI. We tested AI writing the blog posts. And what we found was, if you just told it to write a blog post on 5 best practices in community management, it would, and it would be completely uninteresting. It would be well written and have nothing dynamic in it. But if you, as an agency, figured out what the 5 most important things to think about in community management are, and you had notes that were sort of all over the place on that, and then you asked AI to turn that into a blog post, you sometimes got a really good blog post or a really good first draft. And so it's speeding things along. The other thing is that our clients we've worked with the biggest brands in the world, literally, and none have ever had enough budget to do everything they want to do. And so if we can suck the labor out of the lower value things, that will enable us to still use the headcount, if you will, to add the value, the strategic thinking, the knowledge of the platforms, all those sort of things are still going to be there. And so the level of work may change. The speed with which we're able to deliver what we deliver today may change. And then we may be delivering some more complex things because now we can afford the time on it. So it's an absolute game changer, but I don't think in the way people thought it would be when ChatGPT 3 came out and thought, okay, this can just write all my blog posts and my tweets. And it's not that. And if you have any sort of actual social media strategy, I don't see it becoming that for a while. It is moving quickly, but at least a while.
Well, yeah. Well, this is the thing, right? I mean, you could probably rewrite your 13,000 word, ebook every month, and
Yes.
there'll be an update.
Yes.
Is the reality, and that's the hard part, which is why a lot of businesses are still sitting on their hands because they keep reading or being told that, oh, something better is coming next month, so then they do nothing, and that's a really tough one.
Well, and you mentioned tech stack. Box has AI, Slack has AI that's just come out, Rike has AI, HubSpot has AI, Riverside has AI, Microsoft Office Suite has AI. You got to figure out which ones make a difference and then which ones you can afford. I mean, I think Microsoft Copilot's $30 a user. That's the same price you pay for the whole Office suite. Slack AI will double the cost of Slack. And so you have to really be thoughtful about what's going to add value to what you do and not give you those false positives that can also send you down the wrong path.
Yeah. Well, and like we've been reading for the last few weeks, I think, HubSpot added, 800 features in the last 12 months. So, and we don't know, we can speculate, but we don't know what the features are that are coming out in the next 12 months or even the next week or the next month. But there was one that came out last week or the week before where you can essentially, put prompts into HubSpot and it'll create a video for you. Now, again, to your earlier example, creating that video before would have taken a lot longer, and it's not going to work for everything, but in many cases it's going to work so you can use one person's time very, very effectively to get a message out that can still get the job done really, really well without a huge budget. But then again, so back to the earlier point we talked about is then which tool do you use and which tool do you stop using?
Exactly. And then, if you're Princess Kate, you better be really careful using any AI on your family photos.
But it's when as you were talking about, this whole thing about whenever we're building something, whether it's a, social media, community management program, or in the case that we're going through now, we're renovating a 100-year-old house. The things you want, for some reason, you can't have them all, right?
Exactly.
So somehow you have to figure out. I need to check whether there's AI for all the things that can add the things to the house that we want that we don't have the budget for.
Absolutely. I remember when Photoshop came out, then Microsoft Publisher came out, and there were going to be no more graphic designers because everyone could now do it. And Canva was going to kill designers. It turns out that having some level of talent is also still important somehow.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I'm actually in between. So Abundance 360. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. Is going on right now. It started yesterday and it runs through Thursday. It's an annual event in California, but you can also participate virtually, and it's all around, AI. And yeah, I'm always trying to balance, what is practical right now and still be in awe of all the things that are coming. But there was a session yesterday where they talked about just because it's so incredible what it's going to be able to do and can already do. Most people, because of the limitation of our human, brains, default into one of two areas. One is like it's going to be complete, anarchy, and the other is some other dystopian thing that's not all that great. But it's because we just need to sort of take things, one step at a time and come back and start with, well, what is it that we're trying to solve versus get ahead of ourselves on, what's really possible.
I mean, I do have concerns. I for $19, I think I created an avatar of myself. I can type in any words and have what honestly looks like me say it. And that, you think about that in an election year, and you think about a bombshell video 2 days before the election, and it's not hard to imagine negative consequences. So I certainly think those things are worth, thinking about. I'm probably not the one who's going to be the one that helps save the world there, though. So I'm going to hope other people are watching that and trying to solve for those things as we go.
Jim, well, thanks so much for joining us today. It was good to catch up.
Yeah, enjoyed it, Brendan.
Is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience, sort of from your world of, social media and sort of influencer marketing, which are all connected now? Something that you're seeing that potentially anyone could think about or maybe even implement in the next, week or month, that you would, or at least, research something that you might recommend.
I was thinking about this the other day with a client, and then with a blog post that we're working on coming up, and that is the importance of being interesting. Social media is migrating very quickly away from personal updates and into entertainment, and brands that are not entertaining are easy to ignore. I heard somebody say that advertising is the tax you pay for being boring. And if you look at brands that use humor effectively or surprise effectively, they can often get millions of dollars of exposure without a paid budget. And so I think as you look to at your own social media, at your own marketing, how can you be interesting? How can you be unignorable? How can you be something that is going to gain attention in a way that is brand positive? And I think people skew toward brand safety so much that they're boring, but you don't want to go the other way and just be funny for the sake of funny and not make any revenue off it. So that's where I think the art is these days, is figuring out how you can be interesting in a way that accrues value to your brand. That's the challenge these days.
Great takeaway.
I love that. And I guess maybe if I could ask you one question related to that, and that is, so about, our audience is about 80% B2B and 20% B2C typically. And I'd like to, well, what would you say B2B businesses can do? Because I think they're a little more limited from that perspective of making things interesting. Do you have any ideas for the B2B folks out there?
I think be useful would be a good start. I mean, early on, we would write very long pieces on how to create a social media strategy. We'd give talks on how to create a social media strategy. And I remember my brother saying, "What are you doing? You get paid a fair amount of money for creating social media strategies. You're just giving it away." And what I believe to this day is that there are people who want you to do it for them and have the money for you to do it for them. There are other people who don't have the money to pay you anyway and just really are trying to figure out how to do the best they can do on their own. If they take my thoughts and do that, I have lost $0. They didn't have the budget to pay me anyway. And so if the other people who do have the budget see it and say, okay, these people, I've seen enough, they know how to do it, then I've made my money. And so I think if you can be useful, that will build your brand as highly as quickly as possible. And then when somebody has that need, of course, you're going to think about a company that you think is useful.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of inbound marketing in many ways. But when we first started talking about inbound marketing 10 years ago, we were very quick because we have Best Buys in our backyard in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and of course, a lot of people, were at that stage following what Best Buy was doing, and Geek Squad was, already a very established brand, and it's like, oh, but that's not new. Geek Squad's been doing that for 5 years or whatever it was at that time, and it was exactly that, and they had the same pushback. It's like, why are you showing all these people how to fix all their own stuff, and their response was exactly the same as yours. It's like, yeah, maybe 80% of the people who are the DIYers, for whatever reason, whether it's time or money, they want to figure out how to do it themselves. But the other 20%, which is a very big market, want someone else to do it for them because they don't have the skills or the time, but they do have the money. So yep. I think that seems to be a parallel that keeps coming up.
Still applies today, yeah.
Absolutely.
That's exactly. And I don't see it going away anytime soon.
Nor do I.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.